The chamber was massive, carved from a single piece of crystal that seemed to pulse with its own light. Daewon Kim stood at the human podium, his hands gripping the edges as he looked out at the assembled representatives of 43 alien species. This was the Galactic Council, and humanity had been members for only 3 months. "We cannot wait any longer," Daewon said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "The Morgoth Empire has destroyed 2 mining colonies. They killed 3,000 beings. If we do not act now, they will see our hesitation as weakness." Gia Park stood behind him, her military uniform crisp and decorated with medals from humanity's defensive wars. She had advised him well over the years. Today, she had helped him prepare this speech. The Morgoth were a threat. Everyone knew it. But the council was afraid to act. A tall being with blue skin and 4 arms rose from the Centauri delegation. "Ambassador Kim, the council has always preferred diplomatic solutions. War should be our last option, not our first." "Diplomacy?" Daewon felt his frustration growing. "We tried diplomacy. They responded by attacking another station. How many must die before we accept that some threats only understand force?" The chamber erupted in debate. Some species agreed with the humans. Others argued for more time, more negotiations, more patience. Daewon had expected this. The Galactic Council moved slowly, carefully. Humanity had learned that lesson quickly after joining, but the Morgoth were different. They were raiders, conquerors who had terrorized the outer regions for decades. The Council had always paid them off or retreated. Humanity thought this was foolish. The Morgoth only grew bolder with each successful raid. Gia leaned close to Daewon's ear. "The Kelthari delegate is watching you, Elder Voss." Daewon glanced across the chamber. Elder Voss was hard to miss. The Kelthari were an ancient race, one of the oldest in the galaxy. Voss himself was said to be over 800 years old. His species had a reputation for wisdom and something the others called foresight. Daewon didn't believe in prophecy, but he respected the weight Voss carried in council decisions. The old alien's eyes were fixed on Daewon. There was something in that gaze that made the human ambassador uncomfortable. Not anger, not disapproval. Something closer to sadness. The debate continued for 2 more hours. Finally, the council speaker called for a recess. Delegates filed out of the chamber in groups, speaking in dozens of languages. Daewon felt exhausted. Gia touched his shoulder. "You did well. I think we have enough support for a vote." "We need more than support," Daewon replied. "We need action." "Ambassador Kim." The voice was soft but seemed to fill the space around them. Daewon turned to find Elder Voss standing nearby. Up close, the Kelthari was even more impressive. His skin had a texture like tree bark, and his eyes were a deep golden color that seemed to hold entire universes. "Elder Voss, it's an honor." "Walk with me," Voss said. It wasn't a request. Gia started to follow, but Voss raised one long-fingered hand. "Alone, please." Daewon nodded to Gia, and she reluctantly stepped back. He followed Voss out of the chamber and into one of the quiet observation corridors. Through the transparent walls he could see the stars stretching endlessly in every direction. "You want to strike first," Voss said. "The Morgoth have already struck multiple times, but you want to take the war to them, to attack their home systems, to make them afraid." Daewon felt defensive. "Is that wrong? Should we wait for them to grow stronger?" Voss was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy. "I have studied your species since before you applied for council membership. Your history is remarkable. Violent, yes, but remarkable. We've moved beyond our violent past. Have you?" Voss turned those golden eyes on him. "I have a gift, Ambassador. My people call it the sight. We can perceive ripples in time, possibilities, futures that might be. It is not perfect. The future is always changing. But some patterns are strong." Daewon didn't know what to say. He didn't believe in magic or supernatural powers, but something in Voss's tone made him listen. "I have seen a future," Voss continued. "A future where humanity strikes first against the Morgoth, and I have seen what follows." What follows is victory, peace. No. Voss shook his head slowly. What follows is something your species carries deep in its bones, something from your ancient past. A mechanism, a drive, that served you well when you were scattered tribes on a dangerous world. I don't understand. If you strike first, they will never stop. Voss's words hung in the air like a physical weight. Your people have a trait, Ambassador. When you begin a conflict, when you take on the role of aggressor, something awakens in you. You do not fight for defense. You fight for dominance, for total victory. You fight until there is nothing left to fight. Daewon felt a chill despite the comfortable temperature. That's ridiculous. We're not savages. I did not say you were. But I have seen your history. The tribes that struck first did not stop until their enemies were destroyed or absorbed. The nations that started wars fought them to absolute conclusions, even when it cost them everything. It is in your genetic memory, Ambassador. A survival mechanism that ensured no threat could rise again. You're saying we can't control ourselves? I am saying that if humanity chooses to be the aggressor, you will find it very difficult to stop, and the galaxy will suffer for it. Daewon felt anger rising. Who was this alien to lecture him about? Humanity? To claim they couldn't be trusted with their own decisions? With respect, Elder, I think you underestimate us. We've evolved. We have laws, ethics, restraint, all of which were built for defensive purposes. You have never tested them as the aggressor, not as a unified species. So your advice is to do nothing? To let the Morgoth continue killing? Voss sighed, a sound like wind through ancient trees. My advice is to be very certain before you choose this path, because once you start down it, I do not believe you will be able to stop. I have seen that future, Ambassador Kim. I have seen human fleets that will not stand down. Human soldiers who cannot explain their own fury. A species that fights long after the threat is gone because they cannot remember how to stop. That won't happen. I hope you are right. But I have lived 800 years and studied 1,000 species. I have never been more certain of anything. Voss turned and walked away, leaving Daewon alone with the stars. The ambassador stood there for a long time thinking about the old alien's words. But in the end, he pushed them aside. They were just superstition, fear of humanity's strength. The council needed to act. The Morgoth needed to be stopped. And humanity had the power to do it. 2 days later, the vote was called. Daewon gave his finest speech. He rallied the frightened species, promised a quick and decisive victory, assured them that the Morgoth would never threaten anyone again. The vote passed. Narrow, but it passed. Authorization for military action. A preemptive strike led by human forces. As Daewon watched the results appear on the chamber displays, he felt triumph. Finally, action instead of endless talk. Finally, the council would show strength. Across the chamber, Elder Voss sat motionless. His golden eyes watched the human delegation celebrate, and if anyone had been paying attention, they might have seen what looked like tears on the old Kelthari's face. The next morning, the human fleet prepared for jump. Admiral Taeyang Choi received his orders with grim satisfaction. 200 ships, humanity's finest, would strike at the Morgoth Empire's forward bases. Gia stood in the observation deck as the fleet began to move. Somewhere nearby, she knew, Elder Voss was also watching. She thought about his warning to Daewon. The ambassador had told her about it, though he'd dismissed it as superstition, but Gia had studied military history her entire life. And she knew that Voss was right about one thing. The tribes that struck first never stopped until they won. She just hoped humanity had truly evolved beyond its ancient patterns. The fleet jumped to hyperspace and the observation deck went dark. The Morgoth forward station never saw them coming. Admiral Taeyang Choi watched from the bridge of the flagship Indomitable as human weapons tore through the alien base's shields. It took less than 8 minutes from the first shot to complete destruction. Target eliminated, reported his tactical officer. No survivors detected. Taeyang nodded. Good. Move to the second target. Captain Hyunwoo Lee commanded one of the frigate escorts in the battle group. He had fought in defensive actions before, protecting human colonies from raiders. This felt different. They had traveled deep into Morgath space, far from any Council territory. They had struck without warning. It was effective. He couldn't deny that, but something about it felt wrong. "Captain, we're receiving new targeting data," his communications officer said. "The Admiral wants us to hit their mining operation on the 4th planet." "Is it a military target?" The officer checked her screen. "Sensors show some defensive weapons, but it's primarily a civilian facility." Hyunwoo hesitated. "Confirm that with command." The response came back quickly. The Admiral's orders were clear. "Destroy all Morgath infrastructure in the system. Military or civilian, it didn't matter. The Morgath needed to understand that aggression had consequences." Hyunwoo gave the order. His ship, along with 3 others, descended on the mining facility. The defensive weapons were destroyed first, then the main structures. It was over in minutes. As they pulled away, Hyunwoo stared at the burning facility on his screen. He told himself this was necessary. This was war. The Morgath had started this by attacking Council colonies, but they had started it. Not humanity. Humans were just finishing it. The fleet moved to the 3rd target system. This time they encountered actual military resistance. A dozen Morgath warships defended a shipyard facility. The battle lasted 3 hours and was fierce. The Morgath fought well, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Human weapons technology was superior. Human tactics were sharper. One by one, the Morgath ships fell. "They're retreating," the tactical officer reported. 4 ships breaking formation. "Pursue and destroy," Admiral Taeyang ordered. Hyunwoo was surprised. "Sir, they're in full retreat. Should we let them go?" "Negative. We eliminate all threats. No Morgath ships leave this system." The human fleet chased down the retreating vessels. It took another hour, but they destroyed all 4. Complete victory. When they returned to Council space 2 weeks later, they were celebrated as heroes. Humanity had struck a decisive blow against the Morgath Empire. 3 forward bases destroyed. 24 enemy ships eliminated. The Morgath military presence in the border regions was shattered. Day One watched the reports flood in with satisfaction. He had been right. Quick, decisive action had solved a problem that the Council had ignored for years. Already, several Council species were praising humanity's courage and effectiveness. "We should start planning the withdrawal," Jia said during their briefing. "Bring the fleet home before the Morgath can organize a counterattack." "I've sent the order," Daewon assured her. But 3 days later, Admiral Taeyang sent an unexpected message. The fleet would not be returning yet. Intelligence suggested the Morgath were preparing a revenge strike from their core systems. The Admiral believed it was necessary to move deeper into Morgath territory and destroy their ability to retaliate. "He's exceeding his authority," Jia said, her voice tight. The mission was to eliminate the forward bases. "That's done." Daewon felt torn. The Admiral's logic made sense. If they withdrew now, the Morgath might rebuild and attack again. Better to press the advantage while they had it. Give him 1 more week, Daewon decided. 1 more strike, then mandatory withdrawal. That week passed. Then another. Each time withdrawal was ordered, Admiral Taeyang found new reasons to delay. New intelligence about Morgath fleet movements. New opportunities to cripple their military infrastructure. New threats that needed to be eliminated, and the fleet was winning. Every engagement went in humanity's favor. The Morgath seemed unable to mount an effective defense against human tactics and technology. Back on his frigate, Hyunwoo began to notice changes in his crew. There was an energy aboard the ship, an excitement he hadn't seen before. During mess hall conversations, he heard talk that disturbed him. "We should push all the way to their homeworld," one pilot said. "Show them what happens when they mess with civilized species." 3 more systems and their empire collapses, another officer added. "We could end the Morgath threat forever." "That's not our mission," Hyunwoo reminded them. "We were authorized to eliminate the forward bases. Nothing more." "The mission changed," the pilot replied. "The Admiral knows what he's doing." But Hyunwoo wasn't sure anymore. He had been in combat for 20 years. He understood military necessity. This felt like something else. An eagerness that went beyond duty. He saw it in himself too. After each battle, he felt a rush of satisfaction that seemed excessive. When Morgath ships retreated, he felt an urge to pursue them that was difficult to resist. Even now, thinking about the enemy, he felt anger that surprised him. Mi Sun Kang was the communications officer on the Indomitable. Her job was to monitor all fleet communications and coordinate with Council Command. She began noticing patterns that worried her. Crew messages were supposed to be routine. Updates to families, personal notes, entertainment. But the tone of messages from the fleet had changed. Soldiers wrote home about finishing the job and teaching the Morgoth a permanent lesson. There was an aggressive edge to everything. She brought her concerns to the Admiral during a routine briefing. Sir, I'm seeing unusual patterns in crew communications. Heightened aggression, reluctance to discuss withdrawal. Several officers have mentioned continuing operations indefinitely. Admiral Tae Yang barely looked up from his tactical display. The crew is motivated. That's good. It seems like more than motivation, sir. Some of these messages suggest, Communications Officer Kang, we are at war. The crew understands the stakes. Their determination is exactly what we need. But sir, the Council has sent 3 recall orders. The Council is not here. They do not see what we see. The Morgoth are on the edge of collapse. If we withdraw now, we waste everything we've accomplished. Give me 2 more weeks and I can end this threat permanently. Mi Sun wanted to argue, but the Admiral's tone made it clear the discussion was over. She returned to her station, but the unease remained. That night she reviewed the Admiral's own communications. What she found chilled her. Tae Yang had been sending requests to Earth for reinforcements. Not to defend conquered territory, but to push deeper into Morgoth space. He was planning an invasion, not a withdrawal. She drafted a report to send directly to Ambassador Kim, bypassing the normal chain of command. Before she could send it, her terminal was locked remotely. Admiral Tae Yang appeared at her station an hour later. You overstepped, communications officer. This fleet has a mission. I will not have it undermined by fearful reports. Sir, I was just... You were spreading doubt. In wartime, that's dangerous. He paused. You're relieved of duty. Confined to quarters until we return to Council space. Mi Sun was escorted away by security. As she left the bridge, she saw other officers watching. None of them looked surprised. None of them objected. Hyunwoo received orders to attend a briefing for senior officers. Admiral Tae Yang stood before them, his face grim but determined. The Council continues to send recall orders. They don't understand what we've accomplished here. The Morgoth Empire is collapsing. Their fleet is scattered. Their infrastructure is in ruins. We are on the verge of ending a threat that has plagued this region for decades. The Admiral paused, looking at each officer. I know some of you have doubts. You think we should follow orders and withdraw. But I believe history will judge us by what we do next. We can retreat and let the Morgoth rebuild, or we can finish what we started. Ensure they never threaten anyone again. Around the room, Hyunwoo saw officers nodding. He felt the same pull himself. The logic seemed sound. They had the advantage. Why waste it? But a small voice in his mind whispered warning. This wasn't what they had been sent to do. This was something else. With respect, Admiral, Hyunwoo spoke up. We were authorized for a limited strike. What you're describing is a full-scale invasion. The room went quiet. Admiral Tae Yang's eyes fixed on him. Captain Lee, we are authorized to eliminate the Morgoth threat. That's exactly what I intend to do. By conquering their entire empire, by ensuring they never attack anyone again. Can you guarantee that if we withdraw now, they won't rebuild and return stronger? Hyunwoo couldn't. None of them could. I thought not, the Admiral continued. Gentlemen, we have an opportunity. History gives us few such chances. I intend to seize it. After the briefing, Hyunwoo tried to send his own message to Council Command. His communications were also blocked. When he demanded an explanation, he was told it was for operational security. That night, alone in his quarters, Hyunwoo realized something terrifying. The fleet wasn't going to stop. They couldn't stop. Something had changed in all of them, a shift he didn't fully understand but could feel in his bones. They had struck first, and now, just as some old alien had warned, they couldn't seem to stop. Somewhere far away in the crystal chambers of the Council station, Elder Voss sat in meditation. His eyes were closed. 6 months had passed since the first strike. The war that was supposed to last 2 weeks had consumed entire star systems. Dr. Shung Min Yoon sat in her laboratory on Earth, surrounded by reports that made her blood run cold. She was a xenopsychologist, specializing in how different species thought and behaved. The military had asked her to review combat reports from the Morgath campaign. What she found was disturbing. Human forces had pushed far beyond their original objectives. The Morgath Empire was in ruins, but the fighting continued. Now human fleets were engaged with 3 neighboring species who had tried to help the Morgath. None of these new enemies had attacked humanity first, but human commanders classified them as threats and struck anyway. The casualties were staggering. Not human casualties. Those were remarkably low, but enemy casualties were astronomical. Human forces rarely accepted surrenders. Retreating enemies were pursued and destroyed. Civilian populations in occupied zones reported brutal enforcement of martial law. Min pulled up video footage from a battle 2 weeks ago. A human marine platoon had cornered Morgath survivors in a damaged station. The aliens had surrendered, weapons down. The Marines had killed them anyway. When questioned, the squad leader couldn't explain his actions. They were the enemy, he kept saying. We had to finish it. She found dozens of similar incidents. Human soldiers acting with unprecedented aggression, then seeming confused about their own behavior afterward. There was a pattern here. Min began pulling historical data on human conflicts throughout history. Wars, battles, tribal conflicts going back thousands of years. She fed everything into her analysis program and waited. The results took 3 days to compile. When she read them, she understood what Elder Voss had tried to warn them about. Across occupied Morgath space, Corporal Jae-hee Han stood guard at a checkpoint. She had been deployed for 5 months now. Before the war, she had been a peaceful person. She enjoyed painting and music. She had joined the military for the education benefits, never expecting to see real combat. Now she couldn't remember what peace felt like. Every day brought new threats to process, new enemies to watch for. Her squad had standing orders to shoot first if they felt threatened. They felt threatened constantly. 3 days ago, a Morgath civilian had approached the checkpoint too quickly. Jae-hee had shot him before her conscious mind even registered the action. He had been unarmed, carrying supplies for his family. She felt terrible about it, but she also felt it had been necessary. What if he had been a threat? What if waiting another second had given him time to detonate a bomb? Her squad leader had told her she did the right thing. Better safe than sorry. Can't take chances with the enemy. But the Morgath weren't fighting anymore. Their military was destroyed. Their government had collapsed. Most of the aliens just wanted to survive and rebuild. Yet human forces kept treating them as dangerous enemies. And Jae-hee couldn't stop herself from doing the same. Every Morgath she saw triggered an immediate response in her brain. Threat, enemy, danger. She hated it. She hated what she had become. But she couldn't seem to stop. On Earth, a journalist named So-ra Moon was putting together a documentary. She had spent months collecting footage and interviews from the war zone. What she found was a story very different from the heroic narrative being broadcast on official channels. Human forces were winning, yes. But they were also changing, becoming something darker. She interviewed soldiers on leave. Most couldn't articulate what they were experiencing. They used words like necessary and finish the job, but couldn't explain why the job wasn't already finished. The Morgath were defeated. The threat was eliminated, but the fighting continued. We have to make sure they never come back, one soldier told her. We can't stop until they're completely broken. But they already are broken, So-ra pointed out. The soldier just stared at her, confused by his own inability to explain. We just have to finish it, he said finally. So-ra's documentary was set to air in 2 weeks. She hoped it would wake people up to what was happening, but she feared it might be too late. In the council chambers, Daewon Kim faced a very different situation than 6 months ago. Then, he had been the voice calling for action. Now he was being called to account for actions he could no longer control. Ambassador, your forces have refused 347 recall orders, the council speaker said. They have expanded the conflict to include 3 neutral species. They occupy 12 systems that were not part of the original mission objective. This must stop. I am trying, Daewon said, and he was being honest. But our military command is operating independently. Then you have lost control of your own forces. This is unacceptable. Jia stood beside him, her face grim. She had spent months trying to understand what was happening to their military. She had theories, but no solid answers. Elder Voss rose from his seat. The ancient Kelthari moved slowly to the center of the chamber. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner. I warned you this would happen. Daewon felt anger flare. You gave us cryptic prophecies, not actionable intelligence. I told you that if humanity struck first, you would be unable to stop. Was I unclear? We're not animals. We can control ourselves, can you? Voss turned to address the entire council. I have studied humanity for decades. My people have a gift for seeing patterns across time. We identified something in human psychology that is unique among spacefaring species. He pulled up a holographic display showing images from Earth's history. Battles, wars, conquests spanning thousands of years. Throughout their evolution, humans developed a survival mechanism. Their world was dangerous. Resources were limited. Threats were constant. The tribes and nations that survived were those that could fight efficiently and without mercy. The images shifted, showing brain scans and genetic markers. This trait is encoded in their biology. When humans perceive themselves as defending, they can show mercy, restraint, compassion. But when they perceive themselves as the aggressor, as the initiator of conflict, something changes. A psychological switch activates. More images appeared. Historical data showing conflicts where humans attacked first versus conflicts where they defended. In defensive wars, humans can negotiate, can accept surrender, can show restraint. But in aggressive wars they started, they fight until they achieve total dominance. Not victory, dominance. They must ensure the threat is so thoroughly destroyed it can never rise again. That's oversimplification, Daewon protested. We've evolved beyond our primitive past. Have you? Voss turned to him. Your forces cannot explain their own behavior. Your soldiers kill surrendering enemies and feel confused by their actions. Your commanders ignore direct orders from their government. Does this sound like evolution to you? The chamber fell silent. Delegates looked at the human representation with fear. Voss continued. The mechanism served them well as a primitive species. It ensured survival in a hostile world. But now, with advanced technology and military power, it makes them dangerous to everyone. Dr. Sung-min's research report arrived at the council the next day. She had reached the same conclusion as Voss, but with scientific data to support it. Humans did have an aggressive psychological pattern that activated when they initiated conflict. It was measurable in brain chemistry, traceable through historical patterns, and predictable in its outcomes. Once activated, this mechanism was extremely difficult to override. It created a feedback loop where each victory reinforced the need for more victory. Each eliminated threat created the perception of more threats that needed elimination. The soldiers weren't monsters. They were experiencing an evolutionary response they didn't even know they had. Their conscious minds wanted to stop, but their unconscious drives pushed them forward. Can it be reversed? Jia asked when she read the report. Theoretically, Sung-min replied over the video call. With therapy, medication, and conscious awareness, but it requires the individual to recognize what's happening and choose to fight against it. How many soldiers could we treat? With current resources? Maybe a few thousand. There are millions in the field. Jia felt despair settling over her. They had unleashed something they couldn't control. Elder Voss requested a private meeting with her. They met in a quiet garden on the council station, surrounded by plants from 100 worlds. You understand now? Voss said. I understand that you were right. That doesn't help us fix this. There may be a way. My people have experience with psychological interventions. We could develop a treatment program. How long would that take? To design? A few months. To implement across your entire military? Years. We don't have years. The council is talking about forcibly stopping human forces. That would be a mistake. It would only reinforce their aggression. They would perceive it as defense, not understanding they are the aggressors. Jia looked at the old alien. Why are you helping us? We ignored your warning. Because I do not blame you for being what you are. Your species didn't choose this trait. It was forced on you by your harsh world. And because I have hope that humans can overcome their nature through understanding and choice. Hope seems like a thin thing to rely on. It is all we have. The future's not fixed, Ambassador Park. I showed your people one path. But there are others. Futures where humanity recognizes. 1 year into the conflict, President Young Soo-an sat in his office on Earth, staring at reports that showed how completely he had lost control. Human forces now occupied 12 alien territories. The Morgath Empire no longer existed. But instead of coming home, the military had simply found new enemies. They're not responding to any of my orders, Young Soo said to his cabinet. I am the commander-in-chief. They are supposed to obey me. His military advisor looked uncomfortable. Sir, the field commanders believe they're still following your original authorization. They interpret it as a mandate to eliminate all threats to humanity. I never authorized conquering half the galaxy. They don't see it as conquest. They see it as security. Young Su wanted to scream. How had this happened? How had humanity's military become a force that answered to no one? The answer, he knew, was in Dr. Seungmin's reports. The evolutionary mechanism that Elder Voss had warned about. Once activated, it turned human warriors into something unstoppable, not evil, not insane, just driven by instincts they didn't even know they had. Across space, in what had once been Morgath territory, General Borasong commanded the occupation forces. She had been promoted 3 times in the past year, not because she was politically connected, but because she was effective. She won battles, secured territory, eliminated threats. She was also starting to realize she didn't know how to stop. General, we have a situation, her intelligence officer reported. The Tarlani Collective is moving ships to their border with our occupied zone. Are they threatening us? No, ma'am. They appear to be defensive positions. Bora felt her jaw tighten. Defensive positions meant they saw humanity as a threat. And if they saw humanity as a threat, they might attack, which meant humanity needed to strike first. Prepare a battle group. If they're positioning for attack, we need to hit them before they're ready. Ma'am, they haven't made any hostile moves. This could just be precautionary. Or it could be preparation for attack. We can't take that risk. Part of Bo-Ra knew her logic was flawed. She was escalating a situation that might not even be hostile. But another part of her, a louder part, insisted that any potential threat had to be eliminated immediately. Total security required total dominance. She gave the order. 3 days later, human forces attacked Tarlani defensive positions. The Tarlani, surprised and outgunned, were quickly defeated. Their collective government formally surrendered, but Bora couldn't accept the surrender. What if they were just regrouping? What if they planned revenge? Better to occupy their territory, dismantle their military completely, ensure they could never threaten humanity again. The Galactic Council was in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species demanded action against humanity. The humans had become exactly what many had feared when they first applied for membership. Daewon tried to speak in humanity's defense, but what could he say? Every accusation was true. Human forces were out of control. They attacked defensive positions and called it security. They refused surrenders and called it necessity. They conquered territories and called it protection. Ambassador Kim, your species is a threat to galactic peace, the council speaker declared. If your government cannot control its military, the council will be forced to act. Give us time, Daewon pleaded. We're developing a treatment. We can reverse this. How much time? How many more species must fall to human aggression? Daewon had no answer. Captain Hyunwoo Lee had been removed from command 6 months ago. After he refused to attack a surrendering Morgath fleet, Admiral Tae-young had him arrested for insubordination. He spent 3 months in military detention before being quietly released. Now he was back on Earth gathering others like him. Soldiers who had felt the aggressive drive but managed to resist it. Officers who recognized something was wrong. There weren't many, but there were some. They called themselves the Resistance, though they weren't resisting humanity. They were trying to save it. We need to get the treatment to as many soldiers as possible, Hyunwoo told his small group. Dr. Seungmin and Elder Voss have developed a therapy program. It works. I've been through it. But the military command is blocking its deployment. They don't want to stop, one former officer said. I've talked to people still in service. They think what they're doing is right. Necessary. They can't see that they've become the aggressors. Then we find ways to help them see it. It was dangerous work. The military leadership viewed the resistance as traitors. Several members had been arrested, but they continued anyway because someone had to try to stop this. Jia Park had left her position as Daewon's advisor to work directly with Elder Voss. Together, they refined the treatment program. It combined psychological therapy, medication to reduce aggressive responses, and historical education, showing humans the pattern of their own behavior. The treatment worked. Soldiers who went through it reported feeling like they woke up from a dream. They could suddenly see what they had been doing, understand why it was wrong, and regain control over their impulses. The problem was getting the treatment to the soldiers who needed it. Military command refused to implement it. They claimed it would weaken combat effectiveness. "They're right in a way," Voss told Gia. "The treatment makes soldiers less aggressive, less willing to attack without question. From a purely military perspective, it makes them less effective weapons. But it makes them better people." Yes. The question is whether humanity values being effective weapons or being people. Gia didn't know the answer. Right now, it seemed like humanity had chosen to be weapons. The Galactic Council formed a coalition fleet. 37 species contributed ships. Their mission was to forcibly stop human expansion and liberate occupied territories. When news of the coalition reached human forces, the response was predictable. They saw it as an existential threat. If the galaxy was united against them, humanity had to fight back with everything they had. General Bora called a meeting of senior commanders. "The Council has declared war on us, not officially, but their intent is clear. We need to strike before their coalition can fully mobilize. General, if we attack the Council fleet, we'll be fighting the entire galaxy," one commander pointed out. "We're already fighting the galaxy. They made that choice when they decided to oppose us. But we started this. We attacked first." Bora felt anger rise in her chest. "We defended humanity's interests. We eliminated threats. Now they want to punish us for being strong. We won't allow it." The logic seemed sound to her. But if she had been capable of self-reflection in that moment, she might have recognized it was the same logic that had driven every human expansion. Perceive threat, eliminate threat, perceive new threat, eliminate new threat. An endless cycle. The coalition fleet gathered at the Epsilon threshold, a neutral zone between Council space and human-occupied territory. It was the largest gathering of alien warships in galactic history. Over 5,000 ships from dozens of species. The human forces defending occupied space numbered only 800 ships. They were outnumbered and outgunned. They attacked anyway. The Battle of Epsilon Threshold lasted 6 days. It was the bloodiest conflict in modern galactic history. Human forces fought with desperate ferocity. Coalition forces fought with determined unity. When it ended, both sides had lost roughly half their ships. The battle zone was littered with debris and bodies. Neither side could claim victory. But something else happened during the battle. News footage from embedded journalists showed human soldiers fighting with an intensity that shocked the galaxy. Even when wounded, even when facing certain death, they kept attacking. Some aliens began calling them demons. Others called them plague. A few began discussing whether humanity needed to be eliminated entirely for the galaxy's safety. On Earth, people watched the battle with growing horror. This wasn't the defensive war they had supported. This was something else. Something darker. Sora's documentary had started the conversation. Now millions of humans were asking the same question. When did they become the monsters? President Young-soo made a difficult decision. He couldn't control the military through normal channels, so he would have to go around them. He made a public broadcast to every human colony, every ship, every soldier. In it, he did something unprecedented. He admitted humanity was wrong. "We struck first," he said. "We told ourselves it was necessary, that we were preventing future attacks. But the truth is, we became the aggressors. And once we took that role, something in us changed. Something we didn't even know was there." He explained Dr. Seungmin's research, showed the historical patterns, made it clear that human soldiers weren't evil, but they were being driven by evolutionary programming that was no longer appropriate. "We need to stop," Young-soo said. "Not because we're losing, because we're winning too much. Because we've become what we feared the Morgoth were. We need to accept that we made a mistake, and we need to come home." The broadcast was controversial. Military commanders called it treasonous. But something shifted in the common soldiers. They started questioning their orders, questioning their own impulses. Hyunwoo's resistance movement saw a surge in support. Thousands of soldiers requested the treatment. They wanted to understand what had happened to them. They wanted to regain control. General Bora watched President Young-soo's broadcast with disgust.